And now all of that's been destroyed. If you look at it economically between 1970 to today, the first and income quartile wages have gone down like this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take the area underneath that curve, do a simple calculus, which was actually done by two very good researchers, and you calculate all that's around $47 trillion. That's actually been transferred to the elites. So the first and second income quartile have actually funded, there's been socialism for the super elites, like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Right? So these are the facts. Bottoms up movements win for people. When you have no more bottoms up movements, people lose. And that's what's been going on. So everything we're seeing in front of us, Charlie, is to brainwash people to not take the bull by the horns and build a bottoms up movement. And that's what we've done. You know, I wanted to take that bull by the horn since I was 4 years old. Is that how do you create these bottoms up movements? What are the physics? And our movement, our university, our technology, Truth, Freedom, Health has figured this out. And just like you have a university where you study civil engineering, or you study mechanical engineering, or you study, aeronautical engineering, we've created a university how you study liberation engineering, or revolution engineering, or systems overhaul engineering. And that's what needs to be done.
It's fascinating you say that. And since we're talking about Bolsheviks and everything, the problem, one of the problems that they faced was that they took over all the factories, they took over all the manufacturing facilities, and they shot the managers. They shot the people who knew how to work it.
So I think we should. Yeah, so
we need to keep some of them around this time around. You're
asking a very good question. Look, let's just sort of, since you're bringing this up, right? The first time the concept of a worker comes into being is probably around the 1600s. What's a worker? A worker is someone who he does work and he gets paid a salary. That's called a wage slave, right?
Right.
Prior to that, people didn't they weren't workers, they were serfs. They were given a piece of land, and you were given under the aegis of a king, right? You farm that land, you may give 30-40% to the king, you got to keep the rest. Prior to that, we were hunter-gatherers. Now, so the concept of the working class, which means you work for a living and you get a wage, really comes into being around the 1600s. The first time that group ever try to get their liberation, they weren't slaves, right? They weren't serfs, but they were workers, meaning they're working in a factory, was during the Paris Commune. The French and German, Prussian armies were killing each other in, the Franco-Prussian War. And in Paris, the workers say, wait a minute, this is fucked up. They seize control of Paris. First time that ever occurred. Now, They only had power for 2 months, because what happened was they were figuring this stuff out. But if you look at those 2 months, it's quite extraordinary what they did. They changed rules, laws, all in favor of the vast majority of people. But the French and Prussian armies were so scared, they were killing each other. They marched back into France and they put down this workers' revolution, and then they went back to fighting. That was
priorities.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The second time this occurs is in the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, what was interesting here was everyone is expecting the next big workers' revolution was going to occur in Germany, because it was the most industrialized nation. All right. But Lenin in Russia tries to accelerate that. They only had 5% industrial working class in Russia.
Yeah. A lot of illiterate people.
A lot of it was peasant class. But Lenin's thesis was he could do that. Now, independent of Lenin, there was already self-organizing that so people were striking, the army there's all these workers' movements sort of bubbling up on their own. Mm-hmm. Now, the concept of Leninism was that he was going to have a vanguard party, right? This concept of a top-down movement. And they would organize these workers against the Tsar. The problem was that Lenin actually was successful. When I say a problem was, there were these bottoms-up movements coming, which, if anything, they took the top-down approach, interesting enough. Instead of doing the catalysis of bringing up more bottoms-up workers, leadership bottoms-up, they did the top-down approach, and they were actually successful. Now, what should have happened after the Bolsheviks seized power? So during the period of 1917 to probably about 2 years, there were enormous real stuff. Like Lenin's model was, you have to transition from this old society to the new. How do you do that? Right? So if you had a very wealthy guy who ran a big factory, you would go to him and say, look, you're making $100 million. Your average worker is making $10, right, per year. So the difference in your wealth is about 10,000x. All right. How about this? You're not going to make $100 million next year. We're going to let you make $10 million. And the workers are going to make X, right? Because they knew that there would need to be a transition where you would need to educate other working people to learn management skills, right? If it was truly seizing the means of production, it's not going to happen. You have the revolution, which seizes power, but you still need to train all these people who didn't have that. And that was a path that they were on, believe it or not. Now, what happened was, because they were successful, they got caught in this very interesting, weird environment. Because the day that the Bolsheviks seized power on behalf, and it was on behalf of the working people, over 14 countries tried to invade Russia. They were right, because people are like, holy shit, if this just took, and that's why John Reed's book, 10 Days That Shook the World, is all about, right? Oh my God, if this just occurred in Russia, every worker all over the world said, I want that.
Yes.
So you had overnight workers' parties coming up everywhere, because it was like a bomb went off. It was like the American Revolution went off, and everyone said, we want what America just did. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was very dangerous. So 14 countries tried to invade Russia. So overnight, Russia now goes into a wartime mode. Lenin is dying, and he was really the theoretician. Stalin was more of a bank robber. He didn't have the theoretical framework for any of this, right? But he was sort of an operations guy, sort of your ops guy. Your finance guy is now doing the visionary work, right?
That usually doesn't end well, but
that doesn't end well. And what happened was, you have literally countries trying to invade Russia. Now, a lot of people don't recognize 1776 was when the American Revolution took place. There were no freedoms until 1789. For 13 years, it was a wartime economy. We were tarring and feathering people, right? After you seize powers, when the next phase occurs, is called the counter-revolution. The people who just lost power are going to try to come back into power. So for 13 years, the U.S. was fighting a counter-revolution, even in the United States. And I would argue it never stopped.
Thanks for watching that clip. If you want to hear the entire episode in audio format, just go wherever podcasts are served, search for Macroaggressions, subscribe to the show, and please rate it when you get a chance. Thanks, everybody.